Tarot, horoscopes, and healing crystals, all once associated with the occult, are now a mainstay of modern feminist, leftist, and queer spaces. How and why did these things switch sides? Or, in other words, smart people read their horoscopes. Let's talk about why. And yes, I did once ask a poor MLM man about any peer reviewed studies that showed that her essential oils did anything. Yes, I was 15. And no, I don't feel guilty. So, what's up, guys? Welcome to Meg Talk Science. I'm Meg. I talk about science stuff, and today we are discussing horoscopes, tarot, and crystals. Oh my. So, let's talk about the psychology of belief. What mediates belief in things like tarot, horoscope, and crystals? Well, the first thing that we need to talk about is the placebo effect. So, the placebo effect is when you're given a drug or medication or substance that doesn't actually have the effect that you think it does, you still end up feeling at least part of that effect. So, for example, a few months ago, honestly, my husband and I made a bet. I told him that if he switched me over to decaf coffee without telling me, I genuinely would not notice. I'd have no idea. Because I think that the reason that I feel energized from drinking coffee in the morning is just because I like having a warm beverage, and I really thought I wouldn't notice. So a few weeks ago, he did, and he didn't tell me. And just as I expected, I had no idea that he switched me over to decaf. I had a couple days of like a headache, which ended up being caffeine withdrawal, which I didn't know at the time. I thought it was weather related. And then I'd felt just as energized and ready to go in the mornings with my cup of decaf as my cup of caffeinated coffee, as I usually do. So yeah, that was an example of the placebo effect. I believed I was drinking coffee, and I felt, honestly, just as energized as I usually did when I was drinking coffee. And the placebo effect mediates the effects of things like essential oils and crystals as well. So if you have like a crystal and you hold it and it makes you feel strong and powerful and centered, it's probably less about the crystal and its vibrations and more about you and needing something to help yourself feel a bit more centered. So the second effect that kind of helps you believe in things like horoscope and tarot is the Barnum effect. And this is kind of a fallacy of personal validation. So if you've ever heard any, especially horoscopes, or read any horoscopes that say something along the lines of, sometimes you feel extroverted, and then other times you feel more introverted and withdrawn, that is an example of a Barnum statement because it is so general and it applies to everyone. They can really, literally, if you just read a horoscope, that those are full of Barnum statements because they do apply to everyone on the planet. But it'll end up saying things like, you have a lot of untapped potential, and if you would just work harder, then you could show the world who you really are. So it's these very general statements that apply to everyone. And that is why horoscope and tarot end up feeling so personal to you, because you do like reading those things about yourself. I like reading my horoscope, but you should know that it is tailored to just about everyone on the planet. The third thing that we need to talk about when we're talking about the psychology of belief is the locus of control. So, do you feel in control of your life, or do you feel like external forces are conspiring for or against you? And this can be reflected in a lot of different places in your life. So, it can even go down to, if you fail a test at school, did you fail it because you didn't study hard enough, or did you fail it because the professor made the test too hard? And so if you feel like you didn't study hard enough, that is an internal locus of control, okay? You're putting the onus on you to have studied more and made better decisions, and then maybe you'll pass in the future. If you believe that the professor made the test too hard to pass in the first place, that's an external locus of control. So there was an outside force that was controlling whether or not you were going to succeed in that circumstance. And of course, the reality of the situation might be somewhere in between, okay? If no one passed the test, it probably was that the professor made it too hard. If you were the only person to fail the test in a class of 200, maybe you really should have studied more. But generally, you'll kind of tend to have more of an internal or external locus of control. And having an external locus of control tends to align better with beliefs in like the supernatural and things like that. So people who feel like the world is out of their control are more likely to end up having mystical beliefs. But this belief isn't all or nothing. We end up having a spectrum of beliefs. So if we're talking about the spectrum of belief, you have to recognize that not everyone believes totally, okay? Some people believe more, some people believe less. And I have drawn a helpful visual reminder of that. So the spectrum of belief can range from it's pretty, which is over here, or, I'm interested. I read my horoscope every once in a while, but I'm not sure about it, to a lot more belief. Like you can believe that, everything has vibrations and you have to tune your vibrations correctly with everything else, all the way to like a spectrum of total belief. Like, stay away from me, Scorpio. And I'm sorry, Scorpios, you're just one of the like 3 signs whose names I know. I'm really not into this stuff. But yeah, when you're thinking about why people believe, you also have to remember that people don't all believe the same amount. They have a spectrum. So why did we historically as humans believe in this stuff? And that actually comes down to ancient times, right? So in very, very ancient times, like very old days, knowledge of the seasons was vital for you to keep living and harvesting and planting your crops at the right time. And knowledge of the seasons could be based on observing the night sky and the movements of the stars. I mean, I guess I'm not like a sailor or anything, and I don't do astronomy. But if you had knowledge of the seasons, then you had a lot more knowledge and a lot more preparation for things like the winter time and difficult times ahead. And knowledge of the seasons was intimately tied with knowledge of astrology. So if you had more astrology knowledge, then you were a lot more likely to succeed. And then as time went on, we had other things like witchcraft and midwifery, which helped give women historically some autonomy. But the bit we're focusing on for this video is actually the 1950s to the 1980s. Because, and here's the interesting part, historically, astrology and reading your horoscopes in the 50s to the 80s was considered right-wing. However, people who tend to read their horoscope these days are, by and large, by majority, young women who are politically on the left. Record scratch, right? Like, what? But yeah, horoscope readers these days tend to belong to the political party of science, of logic, of forward thinking and societal progress. And we're not going into whether horoscopes are scientific or not today. If you want a separate video debunking all that, you're going to have to ask nicely in the comments down below. Do that if you're interested. I just didn't think that that was a very good thing to include in this video. But if you walk with me in my assumption that horoscopes are completely unscientific because the stars have nothing to do with life here on Earth, aside from maybe a few asteroids every once in a while, doesn't this seem like a contradiction? And my answer to that is yes, it is a contradiction. And I've done a lot of thinking about this, a lot of thinking about why so many leftists, so many people who themselves say that they believe in science would also believe in this stuff. And I've done quite a bit of reading, and I think I have arrived at some answers for this conundrum. So why do people believe in general? And we've already talked about the spectrum of belief, but I think that there are slightly different answers for why you believe along the spectrum of belief itself. So when we're talking about why people tend to believe in things like horoscopes and astrology, you have to remember the spectrum of belief, because I think that people's reasons can vary along the spectrum. So if you are just in like the it's pretty, I like it, I'm interested stage of things, then I think the fact that it is so Instagrammable and social media-able and pretty and fun, I think that the aesthetic value is really going to be where the value comes for you. Because, guys, the occult stuff is pretty. That new Life and Death Sims pack, I have it. I play it. Okay, I build spooky houses. I love it. So I think that the aesthetic is really a draw if you're over on this end of the spectrum. I think that if you're interested, it can be a really good framework for self-reflection, right? So it's a set of accessible puzzles that you can solve, and the answer is a part of your own personality. And I think that that's a real big draw for a lot of people. So I think if you're interested, then you're a lot more thinking about like the Barnum effect, right? How cool is this? It's talking about me. I think that if you're in more like the everything vibrates or, stay away from me, Scorpio kind of side of things, then I think that you're maybe having a desire to believe in something bigger than yourself, or a desire to connect with your spirituality without connecting with mainstream spirituality. And then you also have a factor of coping with uncertainty. And I think that that's why during COVID, so many astrologers became so popular, because we were, as a society, coping with a whole lot of uncertainty. And then over on this end of the spectrum, you also have having a more colorful, more magical world. And I think that the more you want to believe in that, the easier it is to believe in that. So I think that that'll kick in on like the, everything vibrates end of the spectrum. So yeah, just remember that how much you believe is going to be influenced by why you believe in the first place. If you just think it's pretty, you probably don't believe much at all. But if you are in the, stay away from me, Scorpio, I mean it camp, then you probably have a lot more reasons to believe. So then the question becomes, why do so many leftists believe? And that takes us to kind of like the astrology renaissance that we're currently experiencing in our present day. So the first thing that I do have to mention is feminism and autonomy. Astrology is a spiritual practice that's mostly led by women. There aren't any priests or pastors that are going to dictate to you via a book what you should or shouldn't believe, or what you should or shouldn't be doing. And that kind of goes hand in hand with leftism. It's anti-patriarchal, basically. Furthermore, we also have the rejection of mainstream institutions. If you don't like capitalism, and you don't like organized religion, and you don't like big institutions, astrology offers a lot more of a DIY spiritual practice. You can control what you do or don't believe in or buy or do, basically. On top of that, we have the locus of control that we talked about earlier. So one thing, actually, that both leftists and people who believe in horoscopes share, it's a tendency to believe in an external locus of control. And this can be ideological. So ideologically, I do believe, actually, that there are lots of things outside of our control that kind of determine where we end up in our lives. Things like institutional or structural racism, privilege. Basically, I believe that there are a lot of things about the situation that you're born into that do end up dictating kind of a large part or a good part of where you might end up in life, which is actually a reflection of it in an external locus of control. But as I said earlier, an external locus of control is also associated with belief of things like the occult. Now, unfortunately, I haven't found any studies that link the same people who have an external locus of control in politics with people who tend to believe in things like horoscope and stuff. So social psychologists, please get on that, because I'd be very interested in that kind of study. But I do think that it is worth saying that that is something that people who believe in things like horoscopes and astrology have in common with the other leftists. So when it comes to the astrology renaissance that we're currently in, I think that it comes down to technology having made astrology much more accessible than it was a long time ago. And then for the psychological and practical reasons I've discussed, astrology just ends up being the thing that you believe in if you do feel the need to have a spiritual practice. It's well positioned in society to be the thing that leftists believe in, honestly. And if you do need something to believe in, it might as well be that you have some control over your fate and your destiny, and then the stars can also help you out on certain days. So we've established that leftists and Democrats tend to believe in things like horoscopes and tarot. We've also established that there are certain personality traits that make you more likely to believe in the fundamental premise of like the Democratic Party and leftism that also make you more likely to believe in things like horoscope and tarot. And here's an important question that we do have to talk about, which is how science literate are we? Are leftists, are Americans? Okay, here's my controversial take. Despite Democrats billing themselves as the party of science, we still live in a two-party system. Almost half of Americans vote Democrat, and not everyone who votes for this party is going to understand science and how to identify pseudoscience. That's a basic fact of life, okay? Not everyone is just going to understand that. A political party is made up of people, and people are going to make human decisions. Basically, being a Democrat or a lefty doesn't mean that you're science literate. However, and this is a big caveat, you can be science literate and spiritual, okay? Plenty of people believe in science and God. Plenty of things believe in science and things like tarot, horoscope, and crystals. And just because they are not like the mainstream religion of America doesn't mean that you can't hold those beliefs at the same time. It is perfectly possible to be a spiritual person, to be an agnostic person, and to also believe in science and understand science. So you can believe in astrology and science at the same time if it's more of a spiritual practice. But that led me to wonder, how anti-science is astrology? And this is a question that I never thought to ask before. So I was raised religious in Texas, which means that I was raised Christian. And then I went off to university and I was quickly taught the ways of the scientific method. And astrology never really held my interest for that long. Like I'll read my horoscope every once in a while, but I don't know. It just doesn't hold my interest that much. But how unscientific are astrologers? Say during a time when a lot of Americans held very unscientific views. Say during the pandemic. What I'm asking is, what did astrologers do during COVID? Full disclosure, I got most of this section out of a chapter of a book by William Burns about the history of astrology. And it's a great book. It's a really interesting read. I think that he treats the subject with grace and respect. But basically, a lot of popular astrologers actually managed to grow their followings during the pandemic. And I think that this provides support to the idea that astrology can give us a sense of control over our lives, even in a time when there's just so much confusion and panic. And interestingly enough, the general trends of what astrologers were recommending, instead of going down those like right-wing rabbit holes, a lot of astrologers managed to stay in line with the CDC and other health organizations and kind of follow along with their recommendations. Congrats to them. Like, hats off to them. That's fantastic. That is uncommon. At that time, the yoga space was totally being dragged down the right-wing rabbit hole, and yet astrology and astrologers managed to kind of hold steadfast. And so this might be because lots of astrologers themselves are politically on the left. It might be that astrologers know that their audience tends to be politically on the left. But either way, in a time when there was so much science denial, for astrologers to kind of be partners in scientific endeavors at the time, or at least not go against them, is a pretty big thing. So I do think it's safe to say that astrologers themselves, the popular ones right now in America, are fairly pro-science. So yeah, as of right now, it seems like the astrology space has little tolerance for the right or for anti-science stuff. Yeah, people are complicated, I guess, is really the message of that. I don't know. It could be because a lot of people are interested on more of an aesthetic level and because it's entertaining. But I'm not going to take that victory away from anyone. I think it's fantastic. So, like I said earlier, I don't really read my horoscope that often. It just doesn't hold my interest that much. But I did kind of want to get a sense of how normal, everyday people are interacting with astrology online, which led me to TikTok. And I think that the main appeal for astrology on TikTok is entertainment, of course, and that it gives you a greater sense of self. So things like trying on wedding dresses for each star sign, how star signs sleep, and how star signs will break up with you are common on TikTok. And I think that this is partly because it's in like the standard kind of relatable content vein. You can watch it and you can be like, haha, that's me. That's so funny. And it doesn't even need to be based on the zodiac canon, which I think makes it really accessible to creators. You can just kind of have a vague idea. Maybe you know a Pisces in real life, so you'll just act like them for your little video. And I think that it can also promote engagement. So if you do end up just completely going for a very specific kind of type of person for your video, for your little TikTok, then you can get comments. You see a lot of comments like, I'm a Pisces, but I'd totally be a Leo here. And so I think that that ends up promoting engagement and getting a lot more feedback, which is good for creators. Unfortunately for us, I think that companies have also noticed that things like mysticism and superstition have made us easier to market to. And this is true cross culturally, right? This is just as true in South Korea as it is in America. We buy things to reinforce our identity, we buy things for luck, we buy things because they're pretty. But if you are superstitious, you might be willing to pay more for something that will have the right vibrations or the right energies. You might be willing to go out and buy things if your horoscope recommends that you go buy something pretty for yourself today. And I think that this can be an avenue for overconsumption, especially in the essential oils and crystal spaces. If you are superstitious and a crystal happens to just be very lucky or seem very lucky to you, you might end up buying more or you might end up paying more than you wanted to otherwise. There's this pressure, I feel like, put on by companies to buy more and stay spiritually pure that I do think that we need to be wary of. It's fun to engage in those kinds of spirituality things, and it can be important for a lot of people, but you have to protect yourself. And that brings me to essential oils, which are essentially pretty bad. So I think that the most dangerous aspect of essential oils right now is the fact that there are so many MLMs, multi-level marketing schemes, that kind of market essential oils to people. And I won't go too into depth on how insidious MLMs are. If you're interested in that, check out Sabri Writes Books. It's a great channel, and they've got lots of really interesting videos about how bad MLMs are. But people in MLMs are simultaneously perpetrators and victims of the MLMs themselves. And this puts them in a precarious position, especially when it comes to essential oils, which are kind of giving you an avenue of control, especially medical control over your life. Which brings me to that little clip from the beginning where I asked a poor MLM hun for a peer-reviewed study that her oils did anything. And the reason that I don't feel bad about that is because she was trying to sell essential oils to my mother for treatment of my siblings' Tourette's syndrome. And that is sick and twisted, and I have little sympathy for that. If you are preying on mothers with children with conditions that have expensive or difficult or long treatments or unproven treatments, that is sick, okay? That is insidious, that is targeted, and yeah, I don't have sympathy for that. But in general, essentially, we believe in things like essential oils and healing crystals for the same reasons that we believe in things like horoscopes and tarot. We like having a sense of control. We like having ways to cope with uncertainty. The issue with essential oils is that I think sometimes they can do more harm than good. If you're thinking that you're treating a condition that you're not, that is dangerous. The best condition I think that you can treat with essential oils, is not currently smelling like an essential oil. If your biggest problem in life is that you don't smell like peppermint, go for it. If you have other medical issues, talk to a doctor. So how do people in the scientific community tend to view believers? Now, obviously, I am a skeptic about woo-woo things in general, right? I just can't bring myself to believe in a lot of things. And like me, most scientists are also skeptics, but there's a lot less compassion in the scientific community towards believers. So there's a paper, and I'll link all my references in the description below, as always. But Irwin said it best in 1993, actually. And what he wrote was basically that a lot of the research is super dismissive of people who believe. You're a lot more likely to see research that asks, are these people stupid? Rather than, do they tend to be more creative? Do they tend to be more spontaneous? Are there positive personality traits associated with belief in the supernatural? And I'm of two minds about this, right? I take a harsh view towards predatory businesses and predatory practices and MLMs, like I said earlier, that are trying to swindle people out of their money. That I don't think that my friends who read their horoscopes every day or are interested or even believe in spiritual things like horoscopes or crystals or even essential oils, I don't think that people who believe are stupid. At the end of the day, I do think that it's okay to add color to the world. I think that can be nice. I think some people might not be searching for truth as much as I am, but meaning in the world. And that's okay. I think that we can accept and have value for those practices just as we accept and have value for those people. So, my final thoughts on this whole thing are that humans are complex. As much as we like to think that we are in an age of reason, generally speaking, most people, including me, aren't immune to at least some form of magical thinking, right? Even if it's just your motivation for not tempting fate, like by choosing a safer path on the way home if you're driving during a storm or something. For many people, magical thinking and reason can coexist just the same, right? Like, I have absolutely not tempted fate during an experiment before. So I have exhibited magical thinking while I've been trying to follow the scientific method. We as humans have the same brains that we did when we thought that gods controlled the seasons and the harvests. So we are still those same people, and I think that we all have a desire to believe in something, whether it's the scientific method and proven things or whether it's spirituality. Unfortunately for us, I think that businesses and individuals who want your money are also aware of this, and they're very eager to part you from your money, especially if it means that you get something like a pretty rock in return, which might be marked up in price because it's got those good vibrations, I guess. So just be aware that not everything that sparkles is gold, and not everything that sparkles is even a real crystal. Stay safe out there and stay curious. And thank you so much for watching this video. I hope that you enjoyed it. Like and subscribe and let me know if you want to hear me talk more about something else. So, bye guys.